The God of Israel, whose followers later came to be known as Jews, had his origins in the ancient land of Canaan. While the Bible offers insights into his early years, it leaves many questions unanswered. Scholars have pieced together what they know about Yahweh's origins by studying the archaeological record and comparing the Bible to other ancient Near Eastern texts. What they've uncovered is a fascinating story that reveals how Yahweh evolved from a local Canaanite deity into the one true God of the Israelites. Join us as we delve into the secrets of Yahweh's past and uncover the surprising ways that the Canaanites shaped the development of early Israelite religion. When the Israelites arrived in Canaan, they found a land inhabited by people who worshipped a variety of gods and goddesses. These Canaanites had their own pantheon of deities, each with their own unique powers and domains. Among them were El, the supreme god of the pantheon, and his consort, Asherah, who represented fertility and motherhood. There was also Baal, the storm god, and Anat, the goddess of love and war. These gods were not only revered as divine beings, but also as powerful forces that influenced every aspect of daily life, from the fertility of the land to the outcome of battles. For the Israelites, a small nomadic tribe at this point, the Canaanite religious practices presented both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, they could easily adopt these established customs and gain the favor of the local deities. But doing so would also risk diluting their distinct religious identity. As a result, a complex interplay of resistance, adaptation, and compromise ensued, ultimately shaping the character of Yahweh and the trajectory of Israelite faith. Despite the influence of Canaanite culture, the Israelites did not simply abandon their own beliefs or merge completely with the Canaanites. Instead, they negotiated their way through the complexities of two distinct religious traditions. This process of negotiation was not always smooth, and it often led to tension and conflict within Israelite society. For example, the worship of Yahweh as a distinct god set him apart from the Canaanite pantheon, which included deities like Baal and El. Yet at the same time, the Israelites also incorporated certain aspects of Canaanite culture into their own traditions. One notable example of this syncretism can be seen in the figure of Yahweh El Shaddai. In this title, Yahweh is equated with El Shaddai, a powerful Canaanite deity associated with fertility and abundance. This merging of two seemingly disparate traditions highlights the Israelites' willingness to embrace certain aspects of Canaanite culture while still maintaining their distinct religious identity. Furthermore, the Israelites' interactions with the Canaanites were not limited to religious practices. They also engaged in cultural exchange in areas such as language, customs, and even material culture. For instance, the Ugaritic language, which was spoken by the Canaanites, had a significant influence on the Hebrew language, the sacred language of the Israelites. This linguistic exchange reflects the close proximity and regular interactions between the two groups, underlining the complex web of relationships that existed between the Israelites and their Canaanite neighbors. The impact of Canaanite culture on the Israelites was not limited to their religious beliefs and practices, but extended to their understanding of the world and their place in it. The Canaanites' sophisticated religious system which included a rich mythology and a variety of deities, likely influenced the Israelites' development of their own religious narratives and beliefs. For instance, the Canaanite myth of the binding of Isaac, which predates the biblical account, may have served as a source for the later biblical story of Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac. This shared narrative demonstrates how the Canaanite and Israelite traditions were not mutually exclusive, but often shared common themes and motifs. Moreover, the Canaanite influence can also be seen in the development of the concept of covenant in early Israelite religion. The idea of a binding agreement between God and humanity, a central tenet of Judaism, finds parallels in the Canaanite understanding of the relationship between humans and the divine. This shared concept highlights the ways in which different religious traditions can both influence and shape one another, leading to the evolution of unique theological ideas. The integration of Canaanite elements into Israelite culture was not a one-way street. The Israelites also brought their own distinct traditions and beliefs to the mix, which when combined with Canaanite customs created a rich tapestry of cultural exchange. This fusion of traditions resulted in a unique blend of religious practices, beliefs and customs that set the Israelites apart from their Canaanite neighbors. Despite the challenges and tensions inherent in this process, the Israelites' ability to negotiate and adapt to the cultural landscape of Canaan ultimately contributed to the development of a distinctive religious identity that would later become the foundation of Judaism. The story of the Exodus, which tells of the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt, is a pivotal moment in their history and plays a significant role in understanding the development of early Israelite religion. The Exodus narrative, as it's known, describes the Israelites' journey from bondage to freedom under the leadership of Moses. It's a story of liberation, faith, and the establishment of a unique relationship between God and the Israelites. This event is said to have taken place around 1300 BC, marking a turning point not only in the history of the Israelites, but also in the development of Yahweh as a deity. Before the Exodus, Yahweh was primarily known as a local Canaanite god. However, after the Exodus, he took on a new identity as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This transformation was a crucial step in establishing monotheism within early Israelite religion, setting Yahweh apart from the multitude of gods worshipped by the Canaanites and other neighboring cultures. The event of the Exodus itself was a dramatic and transformative experience for the Israelites. It was a time of intense faith and reliance on Yahweh as they fled from their oppressors under Moses' guidance. During this journey, Yahweh revealed himself to Moses, giving him the 10 Commandments and outlining the covenant between God and the Israelites. This covenant established a unique relationship between Yahweh and his followers, emphasizing obedience, justice, and righteousness as central to their faith. Following the Exodus, the Israelites entered into a period known as the wilderness wanderings. During this time, they remained outside of Canaan, wandering in the Sinai desert for 40 years. This period was marked by challenges and tests of faith as the Israelites faced hardships and rebellions against Moses and Yahweh. Despite these difficulties, the wilderness wanderings played a critical role in solidifying the identity of Yahweh as the God of Israel. It was during this time that the Israelites developed a deeper understanding of their covenant with God and the expectations placed upon them. The wilderness wanderings also witnessed significant moments in the development of early Israelite law and tradition. For instance, it was here that Moses received the full set of laws and commandments that would later be codified. In the Torah, these laws covered various aspects of Israelite life, from religious practices to social interactions and ethical guidelines, providing a framework for their behavior and worship. As the Israelites prepared to enter the land of Canaan, Yahweh reaffirmed his covenant with them, promising to protect and guide them as they faced the challenges ahead. This renewal of the covenant served as a reminder of their shared history, the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings, and the importance of remaining faithful to Yahweh as they settled among the Canaanites. The conquest of Canaan and the establishment of the Israelites as a nation in the Promised Land marked a significant chapter in their history. During this period, the figure of Joshua played a crucial role as he led the Israelites into battle against the Canaanites and their allies. Under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites fought against various Canaanite kings and tribes, gradually conquering the land. These military campaigns were not only about territorial expansion, but also about the establishment of Yahweh's authority over the land of Canaan. As the Israelites settled in Canaan, they continued to develop their religious practices and beliefs. The period of the Judges saw a shift in leadership from charismatic individuals like Deborah and Gideon to the eventual establishment of a monarchy. During this time, the worship of Yahweh became more widespread and the development of religious institutions and festivals contributed to the growth of Israelite religion. Despite these advancements, the Israelites continued to face threats from neighboring nations and their stories of courage and faith in the face of adversity became part of their religious tradition. In conclusion, the God of Israel, known today as Yahweh, has a rich and complex history rooted in the ancient land of Canaan. His origins can be traced back to the Canaanite pantheon of gods and goddesses, from which he gradually emerged as a distinct deity. As the Israelites interacted with the Canaanites, they negotiated a complex web of cultural exchanges, incorporating certain aspects of Canaanite religion and culture, while maintaining their distinct identity. The story of the Exodus played a pivotal role in Yahweh's development, establishing him as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, setting him apart from the Canaanite gods. The wilderness wanderings and the conquest of Canaan further shaped early Israelite religion, contributing to the growth of their traditions and beliefs. Through it all, Yahweh's identity as a powerful and compassionate God who made a covenant with his people remained at the core of early Israelite faith, laying the foundation for the later development of Judaism. Yahweh, the God of Israel, is one of the most important religious figures in history. But who was he? What kind of God was he? And how did he become the one true God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? Now, if you follow this channel, then you might think it's weird to talk about Yahweh on a mythology channel, because many of my viewers believe Yahweh to be the only true God. I want you guys to know that this series will not be pushing any sort of religious agenda. In fact, this series will focus on Yahweh, Odin, Zeus, Quetzalcoatl, and other gods before they became the object of worship. We will look at their origins, their original attributes, and how they evolved into the beings we know today. At no point will we be making claims about any of these deities being more real than others, or more powerful than others. They are all figures from world mythology, and we are simply sharing information on them. And now, with that out of the way, let us begin our journey into the world of mythology by meeting Yahweh, the God of Israel. Now, the first thing I want to cover is the etymology of the name Yahweh, because there's some debate over how to pronounce it. Now, there's no evidence for how ancient Israelites pronounced Yahweh's name, because the four-letter name of God in Hebrew is called the Tetragrammaton, and it was never supposed to be read aloud. Instead, it was vocalized using a system called Nikid that added vowels to consonants, based on context. So if the Tetragrammaton appeared in a sentence with the vowels E, H, O, L, A, then it would be vocalized as E, H, O, L, A, H, W, A, H, E, L, E, Y. However, when the Tetragrammaton didn't have the vowels E, H, O, L, A, then the vowels A, D, O, N, I would be added to it, and it would be vocalized as Adonai. Later on, Jewish tradition forbade the pronunciation of Adonai as well, and instead substituted the word Elohim for the Tetragrammaton whenever it was written in the Torah. Even today, Jews do not know how Yahweh was actually pronounced, because the tradition to not speak his name has carried on into modern times. Now the pronunciation Yahweh comes from the Latin deus, which is derived from the Greek theos, which is derived from the Hebrew Elohim, which is derived from the Akkadian Ilu, meaning God or Lord. So the pronunciation Yahweh is basically just the English adaptation of a term used to refer to a deity in several different languages. But what was Yahweh actually like? First off, the concept of Yahweh emerged during the 13th or 12th century BCE. Though he had been worshipped under different names before then, originally, Yahweh was the patron deity of a small Canaanite tribe living in the land of Canaan, which is present-day Israel and Palestine. Yahweh was probably first mentioned outside of the Bible in a Merneptah stele, which is an Egyptian stone monument that lists a number of places Merneptah, who was an Egyptian pharaoh, had conquered. The stele was created around 1208 BCE, and it mentions the defeat of Canaan as an enemy of Egypt. On another Egyptian monument, the Tel Dan stele, it mentions the house of David and refers to him as my vassal. Some scholars claim this monument dates back to the 9th century BCE, but others argue it is a modern fake. Either way, both of these monuments are proof that Yahweh was worshipped outside of the land of Israel. As far as Yahweh's character goes, he seems to have originally been a storm god. The earliest biblical verse mentioning Yahweh calls him the God of Abraham's father, pointing to a time before Abraham made the covenant with Yahweh that led to the Israelites worshipping Yahweh as their God. Several psalms also refer to Yahweh as a warrior god, implying he was a storm god since storms were often personified as gods in ancient Near Eastern cultures. Eventually, the Israelites stopped believing Yahweh was a storm god, and instead viewed the storms as manifestations of his wrath. Scholars believe this change came after the Israelites absorbed stories of Yahweh from surrounding cultures and reinterpreted them through the lens of their own theology. The Canaanites were polytheistic, and their pantheon of gods consisted of male and female deities. Some of these gods were El, the head of the pantheon, his consort Asherah, and their son Baal, who was a sky and storm god. Baal was very popular in Canaan, and the Israelites initially worshipped him alongside Yahweh, calling him Yahweh's brother. Eventually, Yahweh took on the attributes of Baal and became the storm god, while Yahweh retained his role as the God of Abraham's descendants. Over time, Yahweh replaced Baal as the supreme god of Canaan, and Asherah's worship declined as well, until finally she was demonized and Yahweh was elevated to being the one and only God. This process of Yahweh absorbing the attributes of other gods happened multiple times throughout ancient Israel's history, which contributed to Yahweh becoming an all-powerful, all-knowing God with no equal. When the Israelites left Egypt, they brought their God Yahweh with them as they wandered the desert. Yahweh provided for them by giving them manna to eat and water to drink. He parted the Red Sea so they could escape Pharaoh's army, and he guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. These events cemented Yahweh as a miraculous God who protected his people. After the Israelites entered the Promised Land, they continued to experience Yahweh's protection and provision. Joshua led them into battle against their enemies, and Yahweh gave them victory after victory. Yahweh even caused the walls of Jericho to fall so the Israelites could enter the city and destroy it. All of this was recorded in the book of Joshua, which serves as a foundation for the Israelites' belief in Yahweh's power and his covenant with Israel. Yahweh was a God of justice who demanded righteousness from his people. He chose Israel to be his special treasure, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. But when they sinned, he sent prophets to warn them and to call them back to him. Sometimes he punished the Israelites severely for their sin, even sending them into exile in Babylon. But even when he punished them, Yahweh remained faithful to his promises. He always forgave his people when they repented, and he never broke his covenant with them. So those are the basics of who Yahweh was according to the Bible. However, there are two things I need to mention before we end this video. First, Yahweh wasn't the only God worshipped by ancient Israelites. When the Israelites lived in Egypt, they adopted several Egyptian gods, including the sun god Ra and the death god Anubis. Later on, they encountered other gods while living among the Canaanites, like the storm god Baal and the fertility goddess Asherah. Finally, when the Assyrians and Babylonians attacked Israel, the Israelites were exposed to their gods as well. To make matters worse, prophets from these surrounding cultures would come to Israel preaching that their gods were superior to Yahweh. All of this exposure to other gods led to tension within ancient Israel. Regarding the nature of Yahweh, some believed he was the one and only God, while others thought he was just one God among many. Eventually, the belief in one God spread across Israel, and the people began worshipping Yahweh exclusively. However, this transition didn't happen overnight. There were still people who worshipped other gods alongside Yahweh, up until the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. It wasn't until the Babylonian exile that monotheism became the norm among the Israelites. Now, the second thing I need to mention is that this video only covered a fraction of Yahweh's story. Because the God we meet in the Bible is vastly different from the Yahweh we read about in the early chapters of Genesis. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not a warrior God who demanded animal sacrifices and set his people apart from other nations. In fact, he seemed almost absent in their lives. He only appeared to them in dreams and told them not to sacrifice their children to him. Yet this God was the same Yahweh who later commanded Solomon to build a temple in Jerusalem and instituted Levitical law, which outlined a number of regulations regarding sacrifice, purity, and holiness. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not a jealous God who demanded exclusive worship. Yet he later became furious when Moses made a golden calf while the Israelites were at Sinai. He even threatened to destroy Israel for worshipping Baal and Asherah. So it's safe to say Yahweh developed and changed over time. For the Israelites, the struggle for religious identity was a constant one, since they were surrounded by religions that were very similar to their own. In our last episode, we talked about how the Israelites were able to fight and win wars against formidable opponents, like the Canaanites. Now, after they settled into the land, they faced a new kind of challenge. The people around them constantly threatened to corrupt their religion with their own beliefs and customs. And the Israelites knew that if they didn't do something to protect themselves, eventually they would just blend into the Canaanite culture. The story of Israel is really one of constant struggle to preserve their identity, even after they settled into the land of Canaan. This time it wasn't a physical battle that they were waging. It was a battle of ideas. The Israelites were afraid that their traditions would be lost if they didn't do something to preserve them. So, over the course of several centuries, they developed laws and rituals that separated them from other religions around them. In this episode, we are going to look at what measures the Israelites took to safeguard the purity of Yahweh's worship. If you're new here, welcome to my channel, where we explore the origins of the world's religions. I'll introduce you to each religion's history, beliefs, practices, and sacred texts. And you can see how they compare and contrast with each other. So if you want to learn more about world religions, subscribe to get notified when I post new videos. Now let's go back in time to the land of Canaan. After Joshua led the Israelites into the Promised Land, he divided it among the 12 tribes of Israel. But there was still a problem. There were people living in the land who had not been driven out. These were the Canaanites who lived in cities throughout the land. And the Israelites decided to leave them alone, but only on the condition that they would stop practicing their religion. This did not work, as we can see in Judges, chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And the Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And they took their daughters as wives and gave their daughters to their sons. And they served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of the Canaanites, and sacrificed their sons and daughters to them. They did not stop burning incense or making offerings and taking vows to them, nor did they turn away from their abominations. Even after the Israelites had become great and had multiplied and were very powerful, The Israelites had taken thousands of Canaanite women as wives, and this caused a major problem. The Canaanite religion was very different from the religion of Yahweh. It was polytheistic, meaning that they worshipped many gods, and they believed that these gods needed sacrifices, including human sacrifices. The Israelites began to forget Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and instead they started worshipping Baal, the chief god of the Canaanites, and Ashtoreth, the goddess of fertility. They also continued the practice of sacrificing their children to these gods. And this was very upsetting to Yahweh. He saw the Israelites forgetting him and worshipping false gods, and he was not happy about it. So he raised up judges to lead the people back to Yahweh. The first judge was Othniel, and then came Deborah, Gideon, Samson, and Eli. And one of the most famous judges was Samuel. One day, Samuel said to all the Israelites, "How long will you continue to sin against me? If you will abandon the foreign gods among whom you have sinned and worship the Lord only, I will surely remove all your sorrows and your pains." When the Israelites heard this, they abandoned Baal and Ashtoreth, and they gave themselves over to Yahweh. But soon after, Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So he sold them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. And they cried out to the Lord, and he raised up a deliverer named Saul, the son of Kish. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he became a great leader, and saved the Israelites from the Philistines. And afterward, the Israelites lived in peace for 40 years. And during this time, there was no war. But after King Saul died, another king arose named David. As David's kingdom grew, so did the threat of other religions. At this point, the Israelites had already accepted Yahweh as the one true God, and they had abandoned other gods like Baal and Ashtoreth. But there were still people in the surrounding area who followed these religions, and they continued to tempt the Israelites to abandon Yahweh and worship other gods. We see an example of this in 1 Kings chapter 18 verses 19 to 20. "I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring the land of your forefathers, which I will drive out before you. If I have found favor in your sight, show me now your signs and wonders, O mighty God, and let my offspring be blessed." And he said, "I have been zealous for the Lord, God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." So the Lord answered and said, "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." In this passage, Elijah the prophet tells King Ahab that the Israelites have abandoned Yahweh and instead are following Baal. So Elijah calls all the people to Mount Carmel and challenges the prophets of Baal to call down fire from heaven. They call on Baal, but nothing happens. Then Elijah repairs the altar of Yahweh and calls down fire from heaven, and it consumes the sacrifice. This shows the Israelites that Yahweh is the true God, and that Baal is powerless. And this leads 7,000 Israelites to return to Yahweh. Now, why is it that the Israelites kept going back to Baal? The answer lies in their history. In order to understand this, we need to remember that the Israelites weren't the only ones who believed in Yahweh. In fact, Most of the ancient Near East believed in Yahweh, and for a long time, Yahweh was just one God among many. The Israelites shared their God with the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, and even the Egyptians. But as time passed, the Israelites began to believe that Yahweh was more than just one God. Among many, they believed that he was the only true God. But still, the Israelites had a hard time completely giving up their old ways. You see, they had lived in Canaan for many years, and they had absorbed some of the Canaanite customs. One of those customs was the worship of Baal. And despite the fact that they now worshipped Yahweh, they still held on to this custom. For the Israelites, Yahweh was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He was the God of their fathers. But Baal was part of their culture, and this caused a serious problem. As we mentioned earlier, the Israelites were constantly having to fight off the Canaanites, and this made it hard to separate themselves from Canaanite culture. And since Baal was such an important part of Canaanite religion, it was very tempting for the Israelites to continue to worship him. The prophets knew this, and so they worked hard to convince the Israelites to abandon Baal, and they taught them that Yahweh was the only true God. The prophets told the Israelites to stop sacrificing their children to Baal and Ashtoreth, and instead they should worship Yahweh. But the Israelites weren't the only ones who tried to influence the others' religion. The surrounding nations also tried to convert the Israelites to their way of thinking. For example, in 2 Kings, chapter 17, verse 24-33, it says, "Then the king of Assyria sent the Tartan and his servants, and he brought a large company and took them away, carried them to Kir, beside the river of the country of the Medes, and settled them there, because they were allied with the Assyrians, and he feared them. Therefore, he thus dealt with them. So the nation which he had removed from there did not know the gods of Assyria. And he said to them, You shall fear the God whom I fear, that is, the Assyrian. And they built him high places, and he burned incense on them. They also carved idols and fell down before them. Then the Assyrians sent a commander, Adrammelech, son of someone, and he took Rezin to himself, king of Syria, and Aram, the son of Uzziah. And they came to Jerusalem to force them to do as Damascus had done. And they feared and returned. Each went to his house and did not make Rezin king over them. And they were submissive, each under his lord. So they returned, every one of them, to the land of his God. And they took a lesson from this. In this passage, we can see how the Assyrians forced the Israelites to accept their gods. The Assyrians knew that the Israelites worshipped Yahweh, so they sent officials to Jerusalem to try to force them to abandon Yahweh and worship the gods of the Assyrians. And while the Israelites refused to worship these gods, they still adopted some of the gods of the Assyrians, such as Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, and Nergal, the god of the underworld. In conclusion, we can say that the Israelites struggled hard to keep their religion pure. They were surrounded by many different religions, and they had to be careful not to let these religions influence theirs. In order to keep their religion pure, the Israelites made sure to follow the teachings of their prophets. They listened to their leaders, and they made every effort to obey God's word. And because of their efforts, the Israelites were able to preserve their religion for centuries. Canaanites are among the earliest known inhabitants of the Levant region, and their culture continues to fascinate scholars even today. Most people have heard of them because of their god, Baal, who appears frequently in the Old Testament. However, there is much more to the Canaanite civilization than that, in fact. Some historians argue that they played an integral role in shaping Jewish culture throughout history. So what exactly did they do? And why do we still care about them today? Let's take a look at 4 ways that Canaan continued to influence Jews for centuries. It's me. Welcome to my channel where we bring you new videos every week on ancient history. Viewers' suggested topics always welcome. We've talked about this subject before, but it's worth coming back to because there are so many interesting things to explore. If you think the Bible is just a collection of moral tales or prophecies, then you might be surprised to hear that many scholars believe it was heavily influenced by Canaanite culture. For example, the Hebrew Bible contains numerous references to the gods and goddesses of Canaan, such as El, Yahweh's father, and Anat, goddess of love and war. It also uses Canaanite myths and symbols in stories like the binding of Isaac. This story has obvious parallels with the earlier myth of the binding of El's son, which serves as a clear example of how Canaanite religious beliefs seeped into Israelite society. The Bible even refers to places, people, and events from Canaanite culture, showing how deeply ingrained those traditions were in daily life. For instance, the book of Deuteronomy describes Mount Carmel as the place where the gods were tested, referring to an event recounted in the Baal cycle, a collection of Canaanite myths that tell the story of Baal's journey to overthrow his uncle Yam, who controls the sea and rain. Another example is Gilgal, which is mentioned in Joshua and Judges as a place of pagan worship and sacrifice. The name itself means rolling in Hebrew, but it was likely associated with the Canaanite goddess Jezebel, who was called a Targatis in Syrian tradition and was known for her association with fertility and sexuality. Even figures like Jezebel, whose story is told in 1st and 2nd Kings, may have originated from Canaanite folklore. Her name could be a variant of the Canaanite goddess Anat, known for her fierce independence and strong will, much like Jezebel, who challenged the authority of King Ahab and the prophets of Yahweh. While some would argue these parallels are coincidental, others see evidence of a deliberate effort to incorporate elements of Canaanite culture into Jewish tradition. This practice is known as acculturation, where different cultures exchange and adapt elements of their traditions. It allowed Israelites to relate to their environment and connect with their neighbors on a deeper level while still maintaining their distinct religious identity. There's also another interesting theory, which suggests that Yahwism started out as a kind of Canaanite nature cult, centered around the worship of El's son, Yahweh, in the late Bronze Age. According to this view, early Israelites participated in festivals and rituals common in Canaanite culture, such as the cult of the high places, where people climbed mountains to offer sacrifices and seek blessings. Over time, though, this unique form of Yahweh worship eventually evolved into the more widespread monotheistic religion we know as Judaism. If true, this would mean that early Israelites didn't fully break away from Canaanite customs, but instead transformed them as their beliefs changed. Regardless of whether or not you agree with this interpretation, there's no denying that Canaanite culture had a significant impact on how ancient Israelites practiced their religion. While some of these influences can be seen in the Bible, others are only visible through archaeological discoveries. For example, excavations at Tel Dan in the northern Levant uncovered a series of Canaanite altars dating back to the 9th century BCE. These altars contain several biblical names, including that of King Omri, which provides valuable insights into the cultural context surrounding the books of Kings and Chronicles. Such findings help us better understand the historical setting in which the Bible was written, and offer a glimpse into the everyday lives of people living during that time. Additionally, the discovery of Ugaritic texts, which were written in a Canaanite language, has shed light on the religious beliefs and practices of the time. The Baal cycle found at Ugarit tells the story of Baal's journey to overthrow his uncle Yam, who controls the sea and rain. This myth reflects the Canaanites' close relationship with nature and their belief in the power of the natural world. The myth also shows how important the concept of fertility was to their culture, as Baal's victory over Yam ensures that the land will be fertile and productive. Moreover, it offers an insight into the Canaanites' understanding of the cosmos, their belief in a supreme god, El, who lived in the highest heavens, and their pantheon of other deities, each representing various aspects of the natural world, gives us a window into their perception of the universe. By studying these texts, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of Canaanite culture and their lasting influence on ancient Israel, from Canaan to Jerusalem, a legacy of intertwined religions. As we delve deeper into the rich history of Canaan and its lasting influence on the development of Judaism, we must also acknowledge the profound impact it had on the rise of Christianity. Jesus himself had deep roots in this ancient culture, and his teachings and parables often drew from Canaanite traditions. For example, the story of the Good Samaritan, which emphasizes the importance of loving one's neighbor, echoes the Canaanite myth of Dan and the judge. In this tale, a Canaanite woman named Dan disguises herself as a man and journeys to the underworld to rescue her brother from the clutches of the god Mot, only to be confronted by the goddess Anat, who challenges her to prove her love for her brother. Through a series of tests, Dan demonstrates her unwavering devotion and is rewarded with the secret of immortality. This myth reflects the Canaanites' belief in the power of love and loyalty to overcome even death itself, a powerful message that resonates with the Christian values of compassion and sacrifice. Furthermore, the New Testament contains several references to Canaanite culture, such as the Transfiguration, when Jesus is accompanied by Moses and Elijah, figures who also appear in Canaanite mythology. Understanding the Canaanite background of these stories provides a deeper appreciation for the cultural context in which Jesus and his disciples lived and ministered. It also helps us to see how the early Christians incorporated elements of local culture into their faith, just as the Israelites had done before them. In conclusion, the influence of Canaanite culture on Judaism and Christianity cannot be overstated. From the biblical accounts of El and Baal to the parables of Jesus that echoed Canaanite myths, the legacy of Canaan is deeply intertwined with the history of these religions. by exploring the fascinating world of Canaan and its traditions. We gain a richer understanding of the roots of our own faith and the profound impact this ancient civilization had on shaping the course of religious history. As we continue to study the intricate tapestry of ancient religious traditions, we must not forget the invaluable contributions of the Canaanites and their enduring legacy that lives on in modern times. So let us continue to delve into the mysteries of the past and uncover the hidden gems that make our history so captivating. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for more content. As always, there are some suggested videos on screen. If you want to keep learning about ancient history, thanks to my supporters for making it possible for everyone to keep learning. See you next time.